Early January 1945. Dwight Eisenhower faced the worst command crisis of the war. His British Field Marshal had just insulted every American soldier at a press conference. His American generals were threatening mass resignation, and now Bernard Montgomery was demanding permanent command of two American armies. Eisenhower wasn't just looking at maps. He was carrying the weight of an alliance fraying at the seams. He sat between volcanic American fury and pompous British insistence. This wasn't just a command decision. This was a lonely battle to keep the Western world from eating itself before the war was won. Eisenhower couldn't fire Montgomery without destroying the alliance. He couldn't give Montgomery what he wanted without losing his American commanders. He needed a solution that would satisfy no one, but might keep everyone in the war. He offered Montgomery a compromise. Keep one American army for the Rhine crossing. That was all. No permanent command, no strategic authority. One army for one operation. Montgomery would have to choose. Accept this humiliating reduction or lose everything. Eisenhower waited for his answer. January 7th, 1945. Montgomery had stood before reporters and claimed he saved the Americans during the Battle of the Bulge. He described how he found American forces in disarray and organized the defense that stopped the Germans. He made it sound like American generals had panicked and British leadership had rescued them. The reaction was volcanic. American newspapers reported that Montgomery stole credit for American victories. Veterans organizations demanded explanations. Most dangerously, General Omar Bradley told Eisenhower he would resign rather than continue serving under a command structure that allowed such insults. When Montgomery claimed he handled the battle, it didn't just enrage generals. It cut deep for the GIs who had just survived the Ardennes meat grinder. To them, Montgomery's words felt like a second attack, this time from their own side, dismissing the sacrifices of the 19,000 Americans who never left those woods. Montgomery's own chief of staff, Major General Freddie de Gingand, flew to Eisenhower's headquarters and learned the truth. Eisenhower had drafted relief orders. Montgomery was hours away from being fired. De Gingand returned to Montgomery and forced him to write an apology. Montgomery apologized on January 8th, not because he believed he was wrong, but because his own subordinate warned him his career was over. The apology prevented Montgomery from being fired. It did nothing to restore trust with American commanders. Now, 2 days later, Montgomery was about to make things worse. During the Battle of the Bulge, Eisenhower had temporarily placed two American armies under Montgomery's command. The U.S. First Army, under General Courtney Hodges, the U.S. Ninth Army, under General William Simpson, combined over 500,000 American soldiers. The arrangement was meant to be temporary. The German offensive had split the American front. Montgomery's headquarters was closer to the northern sector. He could coordinate the defense more effectively until the crisis passed. Montgomery saw opportunity where Eisenhower saw temporary necessity. He had proven during the Bulge that when Americans got into trouble, they needed British command to save them. His press conference had been clumsy, but the underlying message remained true. Now he wanted to make the temporary arrangement permanent. He wanted those armies for his great northern thrust into Germany. British and Canadian forces alone weren't enough. He needed American strength. Montgomery saw the Ninth Army as his security blanket, a force of 300,000 Americans he needed because his own British units were exhausted after 5 years of blood. For General Simpson and his men, it felt less like a partnership and more like being held hostage for a commander who didn't trust their methods. Within days of the press conference, Montgomery met with Eisenhower at Supreme Headquarters. He presented his case formally. Keep First Army and Ninth Army under his command. Launch a concentrated offensive in the north. drive to the Ruhr industrial region, end the war by May. Montgomery argued military logic. The broad front strategy was wasting resources. American armies in the South were making limited progress. Everything should be concentrated for one massive thrust under unified command. He needed both armies for the plan to work. British forces were exhausted after 5 years of war. Canadian forces were under strength. American manpower was essential for breakthrough operations. Taking these armies away would doom the northern offensive. Eisenhower listened without interrupting. When Montgomery finished, Eisenhower's response was direct. The command arrangement had always been temporary. The armies would return to American command. Montgomery's face went cold. This would cripple his offensive. Eisenhower was making a military mistake for political reasons. Bradley had already made his position clear to Eisenhower. If Montgomery kept those armies permanently, Bradley would not accept it. He would not serve as an army group commander without armies to command. He would not watch Montgomery use American troops to pursue British strategic objectives while taking credit for American victories. Bradley's position was firm. He had commanded these armies since Normandy. They were his forces. Eisenhower's decision to place them temporarily under Montgomery during the Bulge had been operationally sensible. Making that arrangement permanent was politically impossible. Other American commanders supported Bradley. Eisenhower understood what Bradley was telling him. Keep Montgomery happy or keep American generals loyal. He could not do both. George Patton heard about Montgomery's demand and told Bradley he would resign alongside him. Patton's Third Army had saved Bastogne during the Bulge. His forces had stopped the German offensive from the south. American soldiers had done the fighting and dying. For Patton, this was the final straw. He had saved Bastogne. His warrior spirit had turned an entire army 90 degrees in a blizzard, and yet he was still being chained up by a man he viewed as an incompetent egomaniac. His threat to resign wasn't about rank. It was about his refusal to let American blood be spent on a political general's reputation. The threat of losing both Bradley and Patton would collapse the American command structure. Other generals would follow. The army group commanders who had fought across France would refuse to serve under British strategic direction. Eisenhower faced the nightmare Churchill had feared: a mass resignation of American generals, the alliance fracturing over command politics, the war in Europe jeopardized because Montgomery couldn't control his ego. Churchill called Eisenhower shortly after learning of the crisis. He understood the stakes. If Eisenhower stripped Montgomery of American armies completely, British influence over Allied strategy would end. The final victory would be entirely American. Churchill proposed a middle path. Let Montgomery keep the Ninth Army. Return First Army to Bradley. This would give Montgomery enough American strength for the Rhine crossing while returning most forces to American command. Eisenhower accepted Churchill's compromise. It was the solution he needed. Bradley would get First Army back. Montgomery would keep just enough American strength to maintain British strategic relevance. The transfer would happen immediately. But Churchill also knew he needed to repair the damage Montgomery had caused. On January 18th, he stood before the House of Commons to swallow a bitter pill. Forced to repair the damage of Montgomery's ego, he publicly admitted that the British Empire was now the junior partner, declaring that American troops have done almost all the fighting and have suffered almost all the losses. It was a humiliating moment of political submission that highlighted just how much the world had changed since 1939. Eisenhower knew he couldn't just issue a memo. He had to deliver the reduction in force to Montgomery's face. He called Montgomery in